reborn to the very day of the college entrance, this time right in front of everyone. I tore up my own perfect score exam, all because I knew that the next second my good boss would pick up a small bill from beside my foot and report me for cheating on the exam. In my past life, my exam scores were cancelled, my student status and all my honors and awards were stripped. Overnight, I went from the pride of heaven to a societal scum everyone wanted to beat. My family's company was also dragged down into it. My father jumped off a building, and my mother died of depression. Meanwhile, Viken, who always ranked dead last, became the top scorer of the college, lived streaming all the projects invested in, made a killing rolling in, and had a crowd of big shots trailing behind, becoming the ultimate winner in life. Until right before I did, I realized that he was bound to a fortune-plundering system. The more miserable I was, the luckier he got. And now, reborn back to the day I was reported for cheating, I beat him to it and tore up my own perfect score. Even though countless shocked gazes landed on me, I didn't stop the movement of my head. The proctor finally snapped back to reality and rushed over to grab my hand. "What are you doing?" When I looked as if I had just been jolted awake from a dream, my body shuddering violently. My unfocused gaze slowly recentered me. "What am I doing?" I asked back in a low voice, then dropped my gaze to my own hands. Seeing the answer sheet and exam paper torn to shreds, my pupils constricted, and I quickly squatted down to pick them up, clutching them tightly, and this stunt left the proctors and students present dumbfounded. "What's wrong with him?" snapped from too much pressure. Maybe he didn't do well on the test. Knew he'd get chewed out at home and just decided to tear up the paper. I recognize him. He is Fang Yuan, our school's perennial top dog. He always beats second place by dozens of points in every exam. Fang Yuan. Is he that guy who got first place in the last provincial joint mock exam? That time he was the only one who got a perfect score in English. As soon as those words dropped, the exam hall suddenly fell dead because they suddenly realized that this very last exam was English. Their subtle probing gazes drifted toward the answer sheets on the floor. Noticing this, the proctor's face darkened. Everyone, after saying that, he exchanged a look with the other teacher on the podium, signaling him to come up. He stood right next to me, staring me down to prevent me from pulling any more stunts. And I just stood there with my head low, looking utterly heartbroken and blah. But right at this moment, a mechanical voice echoed, "Host, you may now take action." That voice was so sickeningly familiar it chilled. I had heard this exact voice in my past. By then I had already fallen from the universe into what they called a morally bankrupt piece of to pay for the medical and hospital bills of my father. I was forced to work delivering food as a courier by day, and washing dishes and bussing tables, but the crushing weight of life left me until that rainy day when I was 20. A truck rolled right over me. Rainwater and blood mixed together, streaming into. Vaguely I saw a figure stepping out of the truck's driver's seat. The cold mechanical voice rang out, "Host. His fortune has now been completely plundered." The man clapped. A piece of trash like him only had this little value to begin with. It was well worth me acting like playing second fiddle behind his ass for so long. I forced my eyes open, only to see everything bathed in a sea of blood. I saw someone I never expected to see. My former good friend, Viken, a scholarship student who transferred to our class. In the seconds, he was also the one who reported me during the college entrance exam. Yet in my memory, he was always wearing a faded, oversized school uniform, cowering in the crowd, completely invisible and nothing like this. Now he was stepping in black leather shoes, his hair neatly stopped, and wearing the latest release from a top luxury brand. The latest release. His entire outfit easily cost at least 7 figures. I hadn't seen him once since the college entrance exam. I only heard from others that he performed exceptionally well, that becoming the national Gayakao, and was specially admitted to Peking University. After that, his life was on a winning streak. During college, he applied for several academic patents back to back, made a fortune from his investments, and had several major industry tycoons fawning over him. He was the absolute winner in life, so why was he here? Why did he run me over with his car? And what the hell was this aura he kept talking about? Before I could even process it, I heard him say again, "What an idiot." To this day he still doesn't know that cheat by his foot during the exam was my doing. Thanks to him being so stupid, he gave me such a great start. Education, career, family, love, wealth. He'd never guess that everything I have now originally belonged to him. And it all started with that single piece of paper back then. The memories right before my death were still vivid. I stood there with my head down, my gut burning with a fierce resentment and hatred ready to burst out. At that moment, I heard those words from my past life once again, the ones that dragged me. "Teacher, I want to report Fang Yuan for cheating." Viken stood up with his hand raised. First he shot me an apologetic look, then said righteously that just now during the exam, he saw Fang Yuan pull out a cheat sheet, and he suspected I was cheating. "Who is Fang Yuan?" "I am Fang Yuan, but I didn't bring a cheat sheet, and I didn't cheat." The moment my voice trailed before the proctor could even say a word, Viken cut in Yuan Chinese letter, "Please stop lying. Yesterday you clearly told me you wouldn't do well on this and plan to cheat, and I tried to talk you out of it for so long." He trailed off with a hesitating look, acting as if he was forced to expose my cheating. I was so angry it was true what Viken said. Until the day I died I never suspected that cheat was his doing, just thinking I had terrible luck. Even after knowing the truth, I still couldn't wrap my head why he would treat me like this. Clearly, I was the one who genuinely cared, looked out for him and treated him as a good friend. I still remember when we first started 10th because of his speech impediment. He was mocked and didn't he know how to fight back, so he was always the butt of everyone's jokes. Whenever he got picked on, I would step up, shielding him behind me. Over time, we became friends. His family was poor and couldn't afford, so I used my own allowance to buy him meals. He couldn't spare money for daily necessities, so I shared my things with him. I thought our relationship was built on mutual help, but to him it was just my condescending charity. So much so that he stopped at nothing to ruin my future and tear my family apart. Thinking of this, I sneered whether I cheated or not. Isn't he up for you alone to decide? Since you claim I used a cheat sheet, then bring out the proof. Seeing that I wasn't panicked at all, Baiken hesitated for the system noticed he was backing down. Don't worry. I already dropped the cheat sheet right by his foot. Baiken straightened his back again, pointed at the pile of paper scraps by my foot, and right there by your foot. I request to check those paper scraps. The cheat sheet must be in there. Given his persistent demands, the proctor couldn't refuse. The proctor squatted down and carefully rummaged through them. Other than exam paper scraps, I didn't find any cheat sheet. It must be. Yes, clutching it in his hand, the proctor looked over. I honestly opened my hands flat, revealing only a few exam paper scraps in my palms. Baiken was unsatisfied. I clearly saw him touch the cheat sheet. He must have hidden it secretly while picking up the exam papers just now. With that, he tried to reach out and grab me. The proctor's face darkened. If they cheat or not, 8224 text. We will review the surveillance footage later. Young man, please go back your seat right now, 8220, and help the teacher collect the exam papers. Having failed to find the cheat sheet planted by the Baiken, didn't want to go, especially knowing I hadn't actually cheated, and checking the surveillance would reveal me. Yet with no other options left, he had to slink back to his seat and wait while the proctor was organizing the exam paper. I overheard Baiken talking to his system. What should we do? Reporting him for cheating failed. But since he tore up his own exam paper, does that still count as ruining his academic future? Doesn't count. IV predicted his scores. Even without his final English score, his total points are still enough to get into a pretty decent university. Baiken felt some regret for not stepping up to report me before I tore up the paper. The system's requirement was that he had to completely crush the target's fortune before he could plunder it. This just wasted a golden opportunity. If you can find a way to cut off his path, to find a way to ruin his chances of going to college, and you can plunder him all over again. Hearing that, a determined glint flashed in Baiken's eyes, yet remembering my sudden freak out earlier, he looked somewhat puzzled. Why the hell would he just tear up his exam paper for no reason? Could he have sensed your presence? No way. I am high-dimensional tech. There is no way he can detect. Instead of thinking that, you should wonder if you slipped up somewhere along the way and made him suspicious of you. Hearing this, Baiken let out a soft "He's so stupid. He still thinks I am his best friend. Why would he ever suspect me? He must be just blindly stumbled on a lucky break this time. Guess I'll just have to wait for another chance." Soon after the proctor had gathered all the test papers and answer sheets, everyone signed off and left. The moment I stepped out of the classroom, Baiken came trailing right behind me. "Yuri, not mad at me, are you?" He pouted, looking up at me with an innocent face. "You know how I am. I am always blunt with what I say and do. I genuinely thought you hit Sayachao earlier, which is why I brought up the past." I gave a cold, dismissive grunt and kept walking straight ahead with a Baiken jog to catch up. Probing cautiously, "Yuan, why the hell did you tear up your test earlier?" Felt like tearing it, so I did. With that, I turned my head to look at him with an ambiguous smile. "Are you really that invested in this?" Baiken's expression froze for a split second. "Of course, aren't you my best friend? I was planning to go to the same college as you. What are you supposed to do now that you've torn up your test?" I chuckled. "Look at your grades. Even without my English score, chances are you still wouldn't make it into the same." Baiken's grades weren't anything special. His last two mock exams hovered around the 500-point mark. Even with my English score wiped out, my remaining scores still add up to 580, hitting right where it hurts. Baiken's face darkened. With an awkward laugh, he said, "I am just going to miss you." I ignored him and kept walking straight ahead. When I reached the school gate, my family's car and driver were already waiting by the curb. I opened the door and got in. Baiken tried to get in as well, but I reached out and blocked him. He froze for a second. "Brother Yuan, what's wrong with you? Why won't you let me in the car? Your place is too far out of the way. It is not on the route. But before, you always dropped me off at home first." Like I said, that was before. Nothing is on the way anymore. With that, I slammed the car door shut and told the driver to go. I didn't even have to guess to know that Baiken must be standing right there, staring daggers at me. After the college entrance, I didn't leave the house for a long time. Baiken kept spamming my phone with messages saying he shouldn't have doubted me and shouldn't have reported me to the chief, begging me to forgive him. As the days went by, He anxiously asked which university I was planning to and if I'd even make it to college. I ignored every single I remember in my past. Right after my exam cheating scandal was confirmed, my family's company ran into trouble almost immediately. First, online rumors claim that our chairman had bribed major competition organizers to secure honors for his son, taking advantage of the company's plunging and managerial chaos. All sorts of demons and freaks came out of the woodwork. Then right after that, a clearly fabricated financial report magically appeared online. The top executives of our group were detained one by one for questioning in just over 10 days. A massive corporation collapsed. All our family assets were confiscated and nationalized, leaving us with hundreds of millions unable to handle the blow. My dad ultimately decided to jump from the roof, but he survived the suicide attempt and ended up before he tried to kill himself. He told me that he had indeed approved and personally submitted that financial I couldn't make sense of it in my past until I overheard Viken and realized the system had tampered with it. When I came back, I had my dad pull the submitted financial, and sure enough, I found it had been altered. My dad was shocked and horrified, saying that I clearly checked it carefully. I simply told him to use this opportunity to purge all the backstabbers in the company. By the time the company matters were settled, it was almost a month since. Viken was getting more and more desperate. He texted, I didn't reply. He called, I didn't pick up. Eventually, out of other options, he tried to come to my house to find me, but I had people block him every time. Figuring enough time had passed, and just as the class presidents, I decided to go. As soon as I walked in compared to before, he looked a lot more haggard. His complexion was sallow. His lips were pale, and his eyes were bloodshot, looking as if his life force had been sucked dry by something. The moment he saw me, he looked like a star. Brother Ewan, you're finally here. Why haven't you been talking to me these past few days? I sent you so many messages and you didn't reply. I haven't been looking at my phone. Not looking at your phone for a day, but ignoring your phone for a whole month. Who's gonna buy it? However, knowing I had no patience left for him, Viken didn't dare to press further. During dinner, he sat right next to me. While eating, I listened in on his conversation. What do we do now? P.S. completely ignored. And you want to let me change my plan, so I have no way to harvest his contract. There's no way for me to plunder his contract. Because you're an idiot. You were the one who insisted on choosing him as your target. I tried to warn you. You just wouldn't listen. When the system first bound with Viken, it advised him to pick an easy target for plundering. But Viken refused to listen and insisted on draining my aura. I only tried to drain him because his fortune looked. Viken was practically on the verge of who knew he'd suddenly stop being an idiot. And besides, why hasn't his family's company collapsed yet? The system is puzzled too. I made a move, but for some reason, the authorities suddenly withdrew the report and redid the whole thing. Then why didn't you make another move? The system snapped back. You don't have any points left. Even the points for those 2 attempts were given to you by me. If you still can't pay me back, I am going to start draining more energy from you. It all clicked for me. Just no wonder Viken ended up like that. Turn out his energy was being sucked dry. Energy. All you ever talk about is energy. Viken snapped, getting agitated. Did you actually do a damn thing at all? Were you just trying to scam me out of my energy? After being suspected, the system got furious too, you moron. I don't have time to argue with you. Anyway, there are still 10 days left until the month is up. If you still fail to ruin his academic career, then I am taking back every ounce of energy from you. HMPH Fang Yuan, I heard that during your final exam, one of your close friends asked. I shook my head and chuckled self-deprecatingly. That's nothing, and I suddenly lost my mind. Everyone laughed along. So what was your total score? Can you still apply for a normal university? That question came from Viken. I glanced at him. 577. I had simply torn up my answer sheet and exam paper, and the moment the exam ended, bell rang. The proctors checked my exam and found nothing abnormal. They ultimately decided to only give me a 0. Hearing my answer, everyone couldn't help but being classmates for 3 years. They stopped bringing up my and steered the conversation elsewhere. Only Viken kept pressing the issue. What about that cheating incident? How was that handled? As soon as those words came out, the whole room went dead silent. I sneered. Are you talking about it? The proctor checked the surveillance footage and proved my innocence, sensing everyone's strange looks falling on him. Viken gave an awkward, sheepish smile. I was just worried about you. Glad it was just a misunderstanding. After dinner, everyone went to karaoke. By the time it wrapped up, it was already 10 p.m. The last bus had already stopped running. Viken walked over to my car, acting all buddy. Fang Yuan, since the proctor already, can you not be mad at me anymore? Look, there are no buses now. And we had a few drinks earlier. It is way too unsafe out here. How about you give me a ride home? I had a bit to drink too. Dizzy and leaning against, I squinted at him through half-closed eyes. Get in. A flash of smugness crossed Viken's face. and he nimbly hopped into the car. I kept my eyes closed the entire ride, pretending to be asleep. Baiken tried to make small talk at first, but eventually shut his mouth. In the quiet backseat, I heard rustling sounds, like someone rummaging through something. Convinced he had me wrapped around his finger, Baiken didn't bother me for the next few days. Right up until the final second before the system dead, I received a phone call. On the other end was a strange deep male voice. Someone just entered your exam ID and password, logged into the system, and deleted all the university choices you submitted. The echo of that deep voice hadn't fully faded yet. I held my phone, my fingertips not trembling in the slightest. What welled up inside wasn't panic, but a cold, long-anticipated sense of clarity. It finally happened. Baiken, or rather the entity behind him, had ultimately made a move. On my college application system, this was probably the most he could think of. To cut off my path to higher education before the deadline. At it, thanks. I replied calmly, my tone lacking the breakdown or the other person had expected. Hanging up the phone, my fingers swiped quickly across the screen. The call was answered almost immediately. My dad's voice carried a trace of unmasked tension. Zion, what is it? Lately our family had been through a silent upheaval. My foresight about the future, and those premonitory warnings, had made him view me as son with a bit more awe and vigilance. I cut straight to the point, my voice steady and suppressed. Someone just logged into my application system and deleted all my choices. There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by the sound of my dad taking a deep breath. So it finally happened, huh? Are you sure you want to take that path? He was referring to the backup plan I had insisted he prepare, long before the Gaokao scores even came out. Let us do it just like we discussed. The new library building should be ready to be donated to the school by now, right? That was settled long ago. The donation agreement and your special admission quota have always been running on parallel tracks. My dad's voice grew steady again, carrying the unmatched composure of a seasoned veteran in the business. I'll have my secretary contact the head of admissions right away. Don't worry, your acceptance letter will be delivered to our doorstep on time. Nobody can stop it. The heavy icy boulder in my heart settled down a bit. Money truly is the most effective weapon to shatter the destiny forced upon you. Are you doing okay on your end? I am fine, just a pathetic clown. It'll be resolved soon. Ending the call with my dad. The ripples in my heart completely subsided. All that was left was waiting, and coldly watching someone meet their end. The next few days were peaceful and quiet. I still didn't reply to any of Baiken's messages. He was like an ant on a hot pan, making a few final attempts to rush to my house, only to be stopped at the gate by I could imagine his anxiety. The system's constant countdown warnings and the agony of having his energy must have driven him to the brink of a breakdown. The gold-embossed acceptance letter felt heavy and real, almost at the exact same time. Through some special channels of mine, I heard news about Baiken. Word was he had passed out at home for 2 whole days. When he woke up, he was a completely different person. That Baiken who had ridden the contract plundering me to become an overnight chosen one, a dazzling Gaokao top scorer, and an investment prodigy, was left with nothing. The moment the system was forcibly disconnected, he was beaten back to his original. He returned to that dilapidated home of his, penniless, and even saddled with debt, surrounded by nothing but mocking and pitying stares. When I heard this news, I was sitting on the high-speed rail heading to university for enrollment. The scenery outside the window flashed, and a brand new life lay just ahead.